I would like to welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. I am myself very thrilled to be here. I came from California, and this is the first time I have the opportunity to have a program here at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem on Mount Scopus. It's a very, very big thing from anybody who lives in the Galut. I'm very honored that the Hebrew University allowed us to have the program here, the Mensch Foundation. And I want to thank the president, Mr. Menachem Ben-Sasson, who will give the first talk. So I immediately give the floor over to Menachem. Thank you.
Stephen Gauger, His Excellency Supreme Court Justice Bach, or Gabi, as we allow ourselves in this institute to refer to him between ourselves, within the family, esteemed guests. Before saying a word, I would like to notifying among yourselves in the audience an icon of my family. It doesn't happen so many times, so I'd like to take 2 minutes to say a word about our icon. She's generous. She supports music in Jerusalem with fellowships among many, many circles. She's lucid, clear, enlightened with regard to art. Now you say, each of us. Yes. But none of you is 99 years old, except for my aunt, Rosie Varon. She is here. It's about icons. It's about icons. And yes, Stephen, you have to admit you are an icon of a generation. When it comes to express the previous generation, people who came from a university of life and taught us the lesson of life for the future, you are among the ones who did it through his life, has been doing it through his life, and continues with generosity to think about education to the generations after. And then you created, in one word, an idea of Menschlichkeit. Nowadays, everybody uses it. What's the meaning of it? Generosity, learned, sharing with, thinking of, seeing for. And then after using this term, you look for a person. In this case, it wasn't hard. It wasn't difficult. You just look to yourself, to your left, and you found him. It took maybe a second. Here, you put the arm on arm. I'm not funny. Look at the history of the Supreme Court Judge Gabriel Bach. Last moment, years in Germany, in Europe, going then to what seemed to be safe, Holland, moving to one goal. All of his biography says one thing: service. Serving in the Haganah. Even when he studied the first year and was the best in order to be sent abroad to continue his school abroad and coming back to Jerusalem in order to translate, just a service. And from then on, in all layers of his life, was the service for the community, for the state of Israel, and then it comes to much more than that. So yes, that's the meaning of Menschlichkeit. And if you have a Mensch, is Gabriel Bach. And it's not just the service, and it's not just the history of the personal icon, it's the knowledge, the nobility, and the meekness that he shows us whenever he is around at the Hebrew University community. Personally, I thanked Judge Bach many years back when I had to write some of the Israeli laws, or to go to the depths of his decisions and to draw from them the precedents for daily life in legally Israeli activities. He's a role model. He's a person, and he's happy to see around himself an educated family who sees him as we see him, role model, mensch, and a person that we would love to applaud in this opportunity for what he has been doing and will be doing for many years in the future. Gabi, thank you very much. I had to apologize. As a president, I have now to run to the School of Business in order to participate there in another ceremony. And allowed.
I understand. Go. Thank you, Menachem, very much. Menachem saved me some words about Gabi, and I still have to repeat some of the words that he said, that Gabi is a special human being. I've known him now for 9 years. I've met with him several times. He was part of a seminar conference that I did in Budapest, Hungary 2 years ago. And if the word mensch needs a definition, it is Gabi. I'd like to express to you how this whole thing came about. I was in Budapest in 2002. I spent a lot of time there. My wife is Hungarian, as well as I, but I left when I was 9 years old. And I needed something to do besides just going to the cafes and complaining that everything doesn't work like in America. And a friend of mine who captured Adolf Eichmann on the streets of Garibaldi, Tzvi Malkin, I met him in Palm Springs when he gave a speech, and I asked him if he would speak in Hungary. He's never been to Hungary. Actually, he was there in the 50s, but not as a spokesman, but he was spying around in Russia, ended up in Hungary in 56 during the revolution, and escaped back into Vienna. Just a unique situation. So Peter Malkin, or Tzvi, agreed to speak in Hungary, and we did that. And that's how I figured I'll start a foundation around Holocaust education, which Hungary has been neglected. Germany has done a very, very good job with Holocaust education. Austria was a little bit late, but they caught up, and in the last 15 years they've been doing a very good job. Hungary, unfortunately, is still lagging. There are elements that are trying to do a good job, and then there are other elements that are doing the opposite. There's a great deal of revisionism in Hungary right now. People are now, some people, many people, too many people, are idolizing the devils of the past, such as Miklos Horthy, who was the power man from 1920 to 1945. Certain writers who were anti-Semitic. They're building statues to some of them. They're putting them in the classrooms. Coincidentally, a couple of days ago, a gentleman of he's Hungarian, decided to make Aliyah to Israel. He's here right now. He had the courage to go all by himself at nighttime when they put up this Horthy statue in the countryside, and he poured red paint all over the statue. He's here right now. Daniel Peter, please stand up. Him and his wife, Andrea, who has never had anything to do with Israel. A regular, normal shiksa from Hungary, right? In the best way of the word. And they just Aliyah just a few days ago, and I hope they will find their way here and start a new life. Maze? I don't understand. Oh, he arrived on Yom Ha'atzmaut, of course. Anybody who pours red paint over a statue of Horthy should arrive on Yom Ha'atzmaut. During the reception, I will show you pictures of what he had to go through, and he had much atrocities afterwards. He was under attack Police had to save him from crowds of people, neo-fascist in Hungary. Anyway, this is why we started the Mensch Foundation in Hungary. We're in the process of taking 3 or 5 busloads of children, young people to Mauthausen, doing a celebration on May 12th of the liberation of Mauthausen. My father was in Mauthausen. He survived. That's why I was able to be born in 1948. My mother was actually pregnant when he was taken by the Hungarian Arrow Cross. They didn't take her because she was pregnant. The following day, she aborted the child, thinking that my father was going to never come back. And therefore, I am here now. There's a whole bunch of stories one can tell. Hungary is a special situation. There's about 80 to 100,000 Jews still living there. Many of them are older people. They only speak Hungarian. They're not going to make Aliyah. It's not a logical thing they're going to make Aliyah. Hopefully, they don't have to make Aliyah. Because if the things, you know, it's hard for me not to be crude. If the shit hits the fan in English, then they will have to make Aliyah. I don't know any other way to describe that. And hopefully that will not come. I'm trying as much as possible, and other people besides me, to make sure that doesn't happen. The Mensch Foundation also helps older people, survivors in Hungary, Ukraine, other parts of Eastern Europe with their financial difficulties. That's also part of our work. I'd like to introduce a gentleman who I only spoke to on the phone until now. And he immediately agreed to be one of my spokesmen for this event. Michael Mertes of the Konrad Adenauer Institute. Michael, please come. Vielen Dank.
Gerne. Lieber Gabriel Bach, dear Stephen Geiger, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, let me most warmly congratulate Gabriel Bach on the distinction that will be awarded to him by the Mensch Foundation. For many years, Gabriel Bach has accompanied the work of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation's Israel office as a lecturer, as a panelist, and as a participant in our conferences, and we are very proud we can count him among our friends. In connection with Gabi Bach, the term Mensch, this has already been said by Professor Ben-Sasson, carries a familiar tone. The German word for human rights, Menschenrechte, immediately comes to mind. But I'm also thinking of one of the most beautiful dialogues in Mozart's opera, The Magic Flute. Someone introduces Tamino to Sarastro by saying, "He is a prince," and Sarastro replies, "Even more than that, he's a human being. Noch mehr, ist Mensch." In Israel and abroad, Gabriel Bach is a celebrated authority, a man who has shaped history by faithfully serving the rule of law. And yet he distinguishes himself by an extraordinary modesty and friendliness, in short, a true Mensch. In January last year, I had to moderate a discussion with Gabriel Bach in the German town of Bad Sobernheim. I had invited my youngest daughter, Johanna, a 21-year-old law student, to join the event and to bring along some fellow students. Afterwards, I asked her and her friends what their impression was, and they all told me how deeply impressed and indeed overwhelmed they were. One of the students, a young woman from a Turkish immigrant family, said she had to fight back her tears while listening to Gabriel Bach's haunting account of the Eichmann trial. This brings me to the question Stephen Geiger asked me to address in this evening. How do the youth of Germany feel about the Nazi past and Israel? My remarks will be a mixture of personal observations I've made as a father of 4 children who were born between 1980 and 1990, and of available public opinion research. The generation I will talk about can be called the 3rd and 4th generation. They are the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the first generation, that is, of those Germans who were young adults at the end of World War II. I was born in 1953, which means that I belong to the second generation, those who are now elderly parents and soon to be grandparents. For my generation, the Nazi past has been and remains the central point of reference for our moral identity and our political coordinate system, a compass telling us where not to go. When I was 7 years old in 1960, the year Eichmann was captured in Argentina, my family was spending its summer holidays in Normandy, where the liberation of Europe from Nazism had started on D-Day, the 6th of June, 1944. One evening, I listened to my parents and my grandmother Angelika talking about the past. I've forgotten the details of the conversation, but I can still hear the words ringing in my ears of my grandmother saying, "Thank God we lost that war." From a child's perspective, it wasn't self-evident that losing was a good thing. But of course, my grandmother was right. The more I have thought about the lesson she unwittingly taught me 53 years ago, another lesson becomes even more clearer to me. Collectively, the Germans had not been the innocent victims of a small gang of criminal outsiders called Nazis. Nazism had been an inside ideology supported by millions of Germans, and every German was liable for its atrocities, whether or not he or she had adhered to it individually. In today's Germany, an overwhelming majority subscribes to the proposition that the 8th of May 1945, the day Nazi Germany surrendered, was a day of liberation for Germany itself. Compared to public opinion, German public opinion in 1960, which wouldn't have seen it that way, this change in perception certainly represents an enormous progress. Many second-generation Germans, I can speak at least on my own behalf, still feel a deep discomfort at symbols of collective pride, such as the national flag, the national anthem, and national solemnities. A majority among us would not subscribe to the slogan, "My country, right or wrong," because our loyalty to Germany is not an absolute value. It depends on whether or not Germany abides by the basic standards of human dignity and human rights. However, I would criticize many of my peers for having adopted a radical pacifism which downright condemns the use of military force, irrespective of its purpose. This kind of pacifism is one of the major sources of criticism leveled against Israel in Germany and, for that matter, in Europe. I think radical pacifism is based on the misinterpretation of what never again means. It does not take into account that World War II and the Shoah were preceded by a lack of preemptive resistance at home and abroad to the tremendous threat that built up in Nazi Germany during the 1930s. Chancellor Angela Merkel, a member of the board of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, made it crystal clear in her Knesset speech in 2008 that conveying this lesson to the public is a top challenge to the moral leadership qualities of German and European politicians. How do we react, she asked, when surveys show that a clear majority of European respondents say that Israel is a bigger threat to the world than Iran? Do we politicians in Europe fearfully bow to public opinion? No. However unpopular we may make ourselves, that is precisely what we cannot afford to do. For if we were to take that route, we would neither have understood our historical responsibility nor developed an awareness for the challenges of our time. Either of these failings would be fatal." Unquote. Incidentally, Chancellor Merkel was born in 1954, which means that she belongs to the second generation as well. I would now like to turn to the generation of my children and grandchildren, the third and fourth generation. For obvious reasons, their link to the first generation is fading away. Correspondingly, the emotional response to the Nazi past is different from how the second generation felt about it. This does not mean that young Germans are less prepared to confront the Nazi past. It means that the perception of how relevant it is to their own lives and moral choices are shifting. In the beginning of last year, prior to Holocaust Remembrance Day on January 27, a renowned polling institute asked Germans about whether it was time to put an end to constantly commemorating the Nazi past, einen Schlussstrich zu ziehen, as the wording of the question was. In 1994, a majority of respondents, 53%, had answered yes. But since the early 1990s, that figure had gone down by a remarkable margin. In 2012, only 40% still answered yes, and a majority of 56% spoke out against a Schlussstrich. And even more remarkably, almost two-thirds of the 18 to 29-year-old respondents, 65% to be precise, were against a Schlussstrich. This is the good news. The bad news is that a couple of months later, 60% of all respondents said that they felt no historical responsibility towards Israel. Roughly the same number qualified Israel as an aggressive country, and only 33% approved of a special German responsibility towards Israel. So what has gone wrong? In her 2008 Knesset speech, Chancellor Merkel called for creative strategies for a future culture of remembrance to be developed, as she said, in cooperation with our young people in Israel and Germany. She emphasized that places of remembrance alone, important as they may be, were not enough once memories become part of the past. Memories must constantly be recalled. Thoughts must become words, and words deeds. I will try to translate this into more concrete terms. To begin with, it goes without saying that Chancellor Merkel did not mean to denigrate traditional responses. For many of my peers who attended secondary school in the 1960s, German history lessons ended with the Weimar Republic. Fortunately, this has fundamentally changed since. I saw that my own children were given in-depth lessons about the Nazi dictatorship, World War II, and the Shoah. Their teachers took them to memorial sites and former Nazi concentration camps and asked survivors to talk to the students. In civic education, as well as in our electronic media, the Nazi past is used as the prime example of what may happen if society does not vigorously fight against anti-Semitism and xenophobia from the outset, if human rights are not respected, and if citizens are not prepared to stand up for democracy. In the churches, age-old Christian prejudices against the Jews are being combated by the religious authorities themselves, even though I believe that much more could and should be done. More than half a century after the Second Vatican Council adopted the groundbreaking declaration Nostra Aetate on the relation of the Church with non-Christian religions. Despite these positive changes, why has criticism of Israel rapidly grown in recent years, and why does only a minority believe that history places a special responsibility on Germans towards Israel? I think the answer consists of many elements. First of all, anti-Zionism has become a disguise for anti-Semitism. This is not new, and this is not a uniquely German phenomenon. Secondly, Germans, like other Europeans, are losing sight of the murderous threats to which Israel is exposed. This is not new either. What is new is the fact that people increasingly fail to understand that there is a deep connection between recalling the dead on one side and keeping in mind the living on the other. They see remembrance as a duty they have to discharge, but they fail to see that remembrance also creates a mutual bond between themselves and the descendants of those commemorated. The problem is further complicated by the fact that German society is passing through momentous changes due to immigration, including from Muslim countries. Because of this, up to half of primary school students in major German cities have an immigration background today. When these kids will be confronted with the Nazi past, they will perceive it as a chapter of history which is not theirs because it does not belong to their family's history. 3 years ago, the German weekly newspaper Die Zeit published an opinion poll according to which half of the German respondents of Turkish origin said that confronting the Shoah was a task for every German citizen, irrespective of his or her ethnic origin. Only 15% said it was merely a task for people of ethnic German origin. However, the opinion poll made it also clear that 53% of the German Turkish respondents believed it was more important to be concerned with the Palestinian issue than with commemorating the Shoah. Only 31% rejected that proposition. I think these observations give us enough hints how to specify what Chancellor Merkel called a future culture of remembrance in 2008. First of all, exchange between young Germans and young Israelis could and should be expanded, and on the German side, it should include more and more participants with an immigration background. Secondly, schools and agencies of civic education in Germany should raise awareness among youth that there are new manifestations of anti-Semitism, such as denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination, applying double standards by requiring of Israel a behavior not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation, or drawing comparisons of contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis. A special focus should be put on the abuse of the internet and social media for incitement purposes. Thirdly, political elites in Germany should invest more energy in explaining to the public why Israel matters to Germany more than any other country in the world. This is what I believe. During the last couple of years, we have observed a growing gap between the pro-Israel stance of the German political elites on one side and anti-Israel sentiments within German society on the other. This is, as I already pointed out, a test for the moral leadership qualities of our politicians. I can promise you, ladies and gentlemen, that the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung and myself will do our best to support such endeavors. But most importantly, we need Menschen like Gabriel Bach, who are able to bridge the gap between generations, people who are able to speak to young audiences and answer their questions in a way which opens their eyes, hearts, and minds. We have every reason to be most grateful to Gabriel Bach, who belongs to this rare group of people, and I would also like to congratulate the Mensch Foundation on the excellent choice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much, Michael. When I asked you to speak about these things, I did it for a reason. I knew you had all the facts. I already read about this over the last year or so, and unfortunately, it's not good news. And the only thing we can do, as you mentioned, as a medicine for these bad news, is education, education, education. And what Gabi does tirelessly, traveling and speaking to German communities. He speaks perfect German and does it in Austria. I think you're leaving right now on the 26th again. And there's no other thing. And even second generations like yourself and myself, who were born after war, we have a responsibility to continue this in Germany, I in Hungary, other people in other countries in Europe. This is the best that we can do, and your idea of having more young people and Israelis mixing together is also a positive thing. But there's not enough that we can do. There's always more to do. And thank you for your talk. Stanley, I see that you are here. Stanley Goldman, friend of mine from Los Angeles, professor of law at Loyola Law School and University, and professor of genocide studies. Stanley, come up for a second and introductory few words. Just, I know you didn't prepare anything. Just say a few words. We do the interview afterwards. If you have anything to add to what we just talked about.
No, I gave it an award. We started a program at the school I teach at. I started a few years ago. I'm a child of Holocaust survivors, and I'm also the faculty advisor of all things the Armenian law students at Loyola. And I decided if somebody like me didn't do it, nobody would. So I started a program on the study of law and genocide at the law school I teach at, which obviously greatly involves legal issues arising out of the Holocaust. And I created an award in honor of Raphael Lemkin. I don't know how many of you know who Raphael Lemkin was. He was a Polish Jew who fled in the early days of the war and managed to get out into Latvia, to Russia, to Japan of all places, and then just before D-Day in Pearl Harbor, made it to the United States. And he is actually the man who created the word. He invented the word genocide because he couldn't think of a word that he thought, could refer to what was going on in Europe and what had happened in prior times. And then he quit his job as a law professor and dedicated his life, totally broke. He had to sleep on the couch of friends. He had one shirt. It was frayed. He couldn't afford lunch, and he haunted the United Nations building. He just literally, in the days when security was not particularly, nobody cared, he would just literally walk around, a private guy, didn't work for anybody, and he had this thing in his hand. He had this thing he'd written, and he tried to talk delegates into agreeing to sign it. And it took him years to do it, borrowing money from everybody he knew, and he got them to sign and make United Nations law out of his thing he'd written, just himself, personally. And the thing he wrote is today referred to as the United Nations Genocide Convention, completely authored from beginning to end by this guy. So I created an award at the law school in honor of him, and Gabriel Bach was generous enough to be our first recipient, because if there's anybody who has truly lived an example of the purpose of the genocide law, which is, in Raphael Lemkin's mind, a deterrent. Maybe it won't stop. He never believed it would stop all mass murders. He never believed it would stop all people from being destroyed or wars being fought. But he just thought that it could help. The thought in the back of people's minds that there was some punishment. My own mother was saved, there's a young lady sitting right here, Hadar, whose grandmother was saved with my mother. She was saved. They were saved by what? Heinrich Himmler agreed to release a bunch of Jews from a concentration camp at the very end of the war, as the war was nearing end, in exchange for his hope that the Allies might treat him a little better if he were captured. So she and 500 women were 1,000 women technically were released from a camp and allowed to go to Sweden safely in exchange for these good auspices to the West. Even Heinrich Himmler, the man most responsible in many ways, along with Eichmann, for the Holocaust, was prepared to be fearful of the consequences of his actions. And if it could briefly stay the hand of even Heinrich Himmler, who might it affect? And I think the punishment, the capture, the trial for the world of Adolf Eichmann is a marvelous example of putting the fear of God at least a bit into people. It may not stop it, but it could have an effect. And that's why I asked Gabriel Bach if he could be our first recipient. And we've spoken many times about the Eichmann trial, so I hope to ask him a few questions about it now.
In a few minutes. At this time, Gabi, we have been friends, so it's very difficult to put on a formal show here. You have been a mensch. I know you are. You were very, very modest, and you didn't want to get an award. You said, "I don't think I deserve it," and all. This is exactly why you deserve it. You have been tirelessly traveling the last few years to Europe, packing your little stuff and getting on the plane, and just to show to people what has happened here, the trial, what the Holocaust was about. And I'd like you to come up, and the Mensch Foundation would like to award you. And I'm going to ask for help. We have a director of the Mensch Foundation that lives in Israel, in Yavne. Chezi Lazar, please come up to the stage. My friend and the director of the Mensch Foundation here in Israel, Chezi Lazar. No one here has seen this award yet except myself. This was made in Hungary. Justice.
Very much.
Read the front here. I'll hold it there. It says here, Justice Gabriel Bach, a mensch for all seasons.
Justice Gabriel Bach, mensch for all seasons. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's very, very moving, very beautiful.
A very good artist in Hungary, not Jewish, has been doing this for us. So there's always hope. As bad as things sound, there's always hope. Hope is the last thing to die.
Thank you very, very much indeed.
Please speak.
Huh?
Would you like to say a few words?
Yes. I understand from what has been said that people think that they should appreciate very much that the sacrifice that I brought by traveling a lot and actually all over the world. And sometimes I'm surprised that 50 years have passed since the Eichmann trial, and the interest all over the world, in all continents, is growing from year to year. And not only in Israel and in Germany and in America, but I've been invited to Japan and Australia and New Zealand and Sweden and Hungary, and I see the interest. I thought at first sometimes it's being done for political or tactical reasons, but maybe as an incorrigible optimist, I very much see the positive side, and I see how wherever, I mean, in Germany, for instance, they've decided in every parliament, in every district, every year, they will have a special day for memory of the Holocaust, and they invite me in many of these places to make the main speech there in Parliament and to conduct the evening there. But more than that, they ask me in practically all the places to meet with young Germans, with young people in schools, and they ask the children to prepare themselves. And then the children are asked to go to the newspapers and tell them how they feel about it and what it adds to what they knew about history. And that is, I don't feel there a difficulty or a suffering or something that really gives satisfaction. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I want to tell, I mean, I've been received in Germany. First of all, after I left Germany, for 30 years, I didn't even want to visit, not even on transit, to visit Germany. But then I got on very friendly terms with the former, who was later became the president of Germany, Gustav Heinemann. And then I was asked to go to Germany to speak to ministers and members of their parliament in order to help convince them to drop the limitation of bringing cases against Nazis, which was then there was a deliberation about that inside the German parliament, and that is actually was my first visit there. And I can tell you a lot of things of very, very pleasant meetings with ministers and members of parliament, etc. But for me, one of the most important moments that really showed me that there is a chance to teach young people there. I want to tell you about that. I was once I went by train in Germany from one place to another, and opposite me was sitting a young German, young man, and I saw that he was watching my luggage, where there was a label of Israel. At first he hesitated, and then he asked me, "Tell me, do you come from Israel?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "You know, you're not only the first Israeli that I've ever met, but I've never met a Jew before. But what happened there during the war doesn't let me rest. So I feel I have to do something." I read all the books on history, on Moshe Dayan, on Zionism, and all that. But I felt that wasn't enough. So I started to learn some Hebrew. I know I'll never use it. I'll never visit Israel because I can't look people in the eyes. But I felt I had to do something, so I started learning some Hebrew. So I asked him something. He really knew some Hebrew. So I thought maybe a student of philosophy, or maybe a student of psychology, or one of those people. So I asked him, tell me, are you a student? And if so, what are you studying? He said, no, I'm no student. He said, what are you? He said, ich bin ein Tischlerlehrling. I'm an assistant to a carpenter. That was all he was doing. And if he had met me, he didn't know any Jew, he didn't know any Israeli, he didn't want to visit Israel, he didn't want anything, but he felt he had to do something about what happened, so he started to learn some Hebrew. Now, I must tell you that of many of the things that I remember positively, that is one of the main things. I also want to tell you that I said optimist. What was typical, when I visited Germany, I saw negative things and positive things. The negative things were, I visited Dachau and I visited the Munich beer bar where people with red faces were drinking beer at 11 o'clock in the morning and shouting. That reminded me of what happened then during the time of the Nazis. And then there were these lovely meetings with Gustav Heinemann and with the ministers and other people. But I must say I enjoyed everything. Why? The negative things I enjoyed because I didn't want to like everything in Germany. So the fact that there were negative things was something that also rather pleased me. It strengthened our feeling about what happened in Germany. And the positive things were positive, so I enjoyed those, of course. Now I came back to Israel, and there was a friend of mine who had also visited Germany and had similar experiences, negative and positive, but he hated everything. The negative he hated because they were negative and he hated it. And the positive he hated because he didn't want to like anything in Germany. So you see, I sometimes have pity on people who have that pessimistic outlook. We had the same experiences, but he hated everything and I liked everything. And I must tell you, I never had, when I was state attorney, when I was judge, I never had routine cases. It was actually all the time one really adventure, one after another, things that really gave me a challenge and a great pleasure. But I think the Eichmann trial is the only trial where really not a day passes without me being reminded by association with one thing or another. And the fact that I am still able to go to Germany, now this Friday I'm going again to Germany. I've been asked to meet again with many people and with 3 different groups of hundreds of school children. And when I tell them about things that I saw when I prepared the case against Adolf Eichmann for 9 months living next to him and in prison, and then during the trial itself, and so many documents that we didn't use during the trial because they were not directly connected with Eichmann, but things that are somehow more incredible even than some of the evidence that we showed. That is something that really I don't feel that people have to be grateful for this to me, but because I think that I really get a lot of enjoyment and satisfaction out of that. And it is my hope when people in Germany tell me, we want you to meet our young people because we want our young people to know that things like that should never happen again. Now I know there's anti-Semitism and there are lots of other movements, but I see this now really practically all over Germany. So that really gives me that hope that with the common effort of all of us here and in Germany and in other places in the world, we will be able to prevent things like that ever happening again. And thank you very, very, very much for this special award, which I didn't know about and which I have received now with great thanks.
Thank you, Gabi. you can see why he's the mensch. I see all these awards being given, even perhaps something bigger awards, Nobel Peace Prizes to Kissinger, to Obama. I don't even want to say the other guy's name, Palestinian leader, Arafat. Some of them ridiculous awards. But no one talks about who stands behind these guys. Do they do all this work by themselves? Are they all single? They just travel around by themselves. They don't have any help. I myself could not do the work I do unless my wife was schlepped with me. Sometimes she doesn't want to be schlepped, but she comes, always. And there is somebody that Gabi schleps with him. And I'd like to give a special surprise award, because he's not the only mensch. It's the woman who is schlepped and who packs their luggage and who says, don't forget your toothpaste and blah, blah, blah. And get your medicine, all that. Ruth Arazik Bach, please come up. This is a surprise. It's okay. Watch your step. Ruth, I know personally what you do when you're preparing, like Friday you're leaving, you've been going through a cold, you got to make sure you go because he wants to go, he doesn't want to stay, he doesn't want to delay it. And I know you've been doing this for years and you like doing it and you will always do it. And I think you deserve a Mrs. Mensch award as well. So you are now our first Mrs. Mensch. Ruth Arazi in Israel, Mrs. Mensch.
Thank you.
Also a mensch for all seasons.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm very excited to be here, of course, this time especially for the reasons you all know. And I just wanted to thank you for having us here and being able to listen and enjoy this event as I do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruth. And have a good trip on Friday.
Thank you.
Now, we don't throw these awards around, but I do want to recognize Orly Bach, the daughter of the Bachs. And stand up, Orly. Not everybody knows you. And Michael Bach from Tel Aviv. And Michael's children, the little Bachs. And your children. I haven't met them before. Ariel and Eyal. Stand up, stand up. There's a new generation of Bachs. So if you have so many Bachs, we'll have more symphonies, right? Nothing further. I would like to ask Stanley and Gabi to conduct an interview about the Eichmann trial. Or are you able to do the film? No. Then come. Because Stanley told me that you cannot do the film technically. We wanted to show a short DVD, but technically things are bekakt. Orly?
Thank you. I want to say a few words about these parents of mine. First, about my father. Some 10 or 12 years ago, my father got 2 other awards. One was Yakir Yerushalayim, which is like the cherished citizen of Jerusalem. And the other was Abir Echut HaShilton, which means the Knight of Quality of Government. And he was asked to give speeches on both occasions, which he did. And in both of them, he emphasized that the way to fight corruption, because this award was about the Quality of Government Award was about fighting corruption in Israel. And he said the way to fight corruption is not by bringing up all the bad news about the bad things happening, but that he pleaded with the media, like he always does, like a mantra, that bringing and presenting good things about positive phenomenon happening in Israel on all spheres of life, social and cultural, and in the legal system, and even the political system, that showing that would bring about more goodness. And, you know, what you didn't know, Abba, is that nowadays in the modern science of psychology, there's a whole new field in psychology that's called positive psychology, with the same ideas, basically, that if you help people see their strengths and their resources and the good things about them, they'll become better and their symptoms will be alleviated a lot more than if you deal with their problems just their problems and their difficulties. And so you have, how do you say, you're ahead of your time in this sense also. And so not to take anything away from the other awards, I think that this award, for me personally, is particularly important because I think that being a mensch is the most important thing about being a human being. And so I feel very fortunate and very blessed to have grown up with a mensch like you, because I want to tell you people that he has not only been a mensch outside, he's a mensch at home. And same applies to my mother. And out of many stories I could tell about you, Ima, I want to say tell one little story, and that is about a month ago, my mother had to undergo surgery. Nothing very, very severe or dangerous. It was hernia surgery, but it was sudden. She went into the doctor's office and straight from the doctor's office into the operating room. And when she was released from the hospital, she got a discharge letter saying that she needed to rest at home for a couple of weeks. Doctor's orders. But this mensch person had to go to Germany on a lecture tour 5 days later. And my mother said, no way, I'm coming with. And so my brother Michael and I were trying to dissuade her and to say, Mom, you know, you need to take care of yourself, stay home, and no reasoning with her. So when we saw that there was no reasoning with you, we appealed to the Supreme Court judge and we said, you do something about it, tell her to stay home. And he thought about it for a while. He said, let's wait and see a few days how she recuperates. But I think she'll be better off with me. And so 5 days later, these two people were on the plane on their way to Germany, and which was quite a trip. They had to go and take one plane and then another plane and go from one place to another. But I think that they really enjoyed their time together. And frankly, you know, in retrospect, I think that this trip actually helped my mother heal a lot quicker than had she stayed home with us. And so, am I right? Yeah, it was amazing recovery. And that made me think of a term that was coined when Golda Meir was in office. And that term was psychosomatic health. And what they meant by this term was that Golda, as we all know, was not very healthy. She had cancer and she was like smoking her life away and everything. But she had to live up to her commitment. She She was very committed. She had a lot of responsibilities as a prime minister. So she had to stay on her feet and keep going. And so this is how the term psychosomatic health came about. And so I want to wish both of you, my parents, a lot of good health and psychosomatic health, and which comes from commitment and from happiness, and for a very, very long and healthy life.
Thank you, Orly. Thank you. Over the last 11 years, I have had the pleasure of giving this award all over the place. None of it has given me as much satisfaction as today, giving it in my homeland, Israel, in Jerusalem, the eternal capital of Israel, and to give it to my friend Gabi. And I feel like I'm part of the family. It's a special day, and I'm glad that you are here to enjoy this with us. And I hope you stay longer while we have an interview about the Eichmann trial. Stanley, you're on.
I'm the most superfluous person here because he doesn't need anybody to ask him questions about the Eichmann trial, but let's see if we can just pick Justice Bach and I have spoken a number of occasions about this, and I've heard him speak a number of occasions. So let me just start by asking you, because I know one of the more chilling stories you've ever told me was about the very first time you met Adolf Eichmann, and what had just immediately preceded it. So if perhaps you could start by telling us about that.
Yes, I'm very often asked, how did you start actually getting in touch? 2 days after Eichmann was brought to Israel, the Minister of Justice, Rosen, asked me if I would be prepared to be the legal advisor of the police bureau that conducted the investigation and to be in this prison. Actually, you know, they vacated the whole prison for this, not in Yagur, not far from Haifa, and there they kept Eichmann, and there were 30, 40 police officers, and I had my office there. I also was the only contact Eichmann had with the outside world until his lawyers came. But I let him know when I arrived in this prison that if he had some problem, technical or philosophical, psychological problems, connection with his family or his lawyers, then he could come to me. But that I was not prepared to talk to him about the offenses alleged against him, because then I would have to be a witness. And I knew I would be one of the prosecutors in the trial. So at first I didn't meet him at all. But then I never forget, there was a day in which I was sitting in my office there in this prison, and I was reading the autobiography of Rudolf Höss, the commander of Auschwitz. This man was hanged in Poland in 1948, 12 years before Eichmann was caught. But before he was executed, he wrote his biographical notes. And I was reading those on that day, and I read a chapter where he described how they had many days where they killed 1,000 Jewish children a day. And he described how the children used to kneel down sometimes in order to be saved. And then it added, when I and my colleagues had to push the children into the gas chambers, my knees were getting a bit wobbly sometimes. But then he added, but I always felt ashamed afterwards of this weakness of mine after I talked to Obersturmbannführer Adolf Eichmann, because Eichmann explained to me that especially the Jewish children who have to be killed first. He says, because where is the logic that you kill a generation of older people and you leave alive a generation of possible avengers who might afterwards create that race again? Well, 10 minutes after I read that, a policeman came in and said, Adolf Eichmann wants to see you. So I must tell you, when I heard his steps outside and he was sitting opposite me like you are sitting now, it was not very easy to keep a very ordinary poker face at that particular moment. I mean, that was my first meeting with him.
You know, to this day, I think people who've read about the Eichmann trial wanted something scholarly to read. Still, to this day, the primary book people tend to read is by Hannah Arendt, a Jewish woman who was a philosopher, and there's a movie that's just out on her, about her now. And the image that people have of Eichmann, this phrase, banality of evil, of course, as I think so many people know if they know anything about the trial, this image of Eichmann basically is the result of her. And once again, within a few months, perhaps the smartest guy I know in America and I were chatting about the Eichmann trial, and all he wanted to talk about was Hannah Arendt's book. And he'd read it and was absolutely convinced, of course, it must be true. And I was, you know, and we've discussed this before, and I was wondering if you could tell us, just to begin with, in general terms, what you think of this depiction of Eichmann that has come down to us because of that book, and also perhaps some of your contact with Hannah Arendt during the trial.
Yes, well, that of course was one of the first and most important points that we examined during the investigation period with Eichmann. I mean, the fact that he, as head of the Jewish department, that he was involved in killing and that he had something to do with it and that he might be guilty, that is something that really had no doubts. But that problem, was he, from the point of view also of the punishment that we wanted to ask afterwards, if he really only was someone of the, not of the highest rank, who just carried out orders, or whether he was more than that. And that was one of the main points that I tried to examine also during the preliminary stage. And I have absolutely no doubt that the picture shown by Hannah Arendt, as if he was really mainly only someone who obeyed orders, is completely wrong. And I mean, I told you this story about Höss, what he said about the children, but that's only one point. There is a list of things. Towards the end of the war, his friends told us, they gave evidence in many places in the world, that Eichmann said to them, I know the war is lost, but I'm still going to win my war. And then he went to Auschwitz to get the death rate increased from 10,000 a day to 12,000 a day. When suddenly, towards the end of the war, there was someone who proposed that every German soldier who was 1/4 Jewish, one Jewish grandmother or one Jewish grandfather, that he should either be castrated or be sent to a concentration camp. Well, Eichmann supported that incredibly by word and also in writing. Who was against it was General Keitel, the commander-in-chief of the German army, not out of humanitarian reasons, but he said towards the end of the war there were thousands of soldiers like that, and they had fought gallantry together with all the other soldiers that would weaken my army, and Hitler supported Keitel. But Eichmann continuously fought in favor of that. Another point, one of the, you know, maybe not 100% logical, during the investigation, of course, we came across documents, and the German government was very cooperative. They gave us all assistance, they gave us all the documents from all files from every ministry, and from the army and the SS and so on, and really helped us all along the way. So we had lots of information. But as I said, we didn't have a complete picture. But we had a police officer for every country. So there were always attempts to sometimes save one Jewish family or one particular Jewish person. And when the police officer brought me these documents from every evening, I got all the information out of millions of documents that were examined. If that might be relevant. So when there was someone who tried to save, when some Jewish person or family there was an attempt to save them, that I got that in the evening. But as this was all chronological, until I saw the reply and the decision of Eichmann, hundreds and others, thousands of documents were in between. And that took a few days, sometimes weeks. So I had dreams at night that maybe someone of these people might be saved, but without a single exception. Every case like that came to Eichmann was decided upon negatively. I don't want to be so negative, so theoretical. I give you just one or two examples. One day, the person in charge of France, he came to me, the policeman in charge of France, he brought me a telegram sent to Eichmann by a German general, the commander of Paris. He wrote to Eichmann that there was a Jewish Professor Weiss, an expert on radar, and that it was very important for the German army that the German people and the German scientists could examine this man compared to the German, what the Germans had found out. And therefore he insisted that this Professor Weiss and his wife should not be deported. Now, here I must admit, that's what I dreamt, that here, after all, one Jewish person, one Jewish man and his wife, an expert on radar, important for the German army. The German general of the Wehrmacht demands it. So here he must agree. After a few days, the answer of Eichmann, out of question of principle, I cannot possibly agree. A few days later, the German general called Eichmann. How dare you countermand my orders? I am a general of the Wehrmacht. And the answer of Eichmann, and I am an Obersturmbannführer of the SS, and I don't care what rank you have in the army. 2 days later, Eichmann writes to this general, I have examined the matter further, and I found out that the German army has already taken over all the patents of that Jew Weiss. Therefore, I see no reason even for one more day to postpone the deportation of that Jew. And then a note that this man and his wife had been sent to their death in Auschwitz. Here I also want to add, I also examined all the witnesses in Western Europe in court. So I said, of course, I gave these documents. I handed them into court. 2 days later, my secretary came to me and said, the young girl outside wants to see you. That was her name, Ilana Weiss. Don't know who she is. She came in and she said, you know, I'm the daughter of this Professor Weiss. I was a baby when they took my parents away. My parents apparently saw the SS coming and sent me to neighbors. The neighbors kept me and sent me to America. Now I live there, and I saw in the newspaper that you put in these documents. Now, not only didn't I know my parents, but I don't even have a picture of what they looked like. Could you give me some advice as to how to at least get a picture of that man? One day the policeman in charge of Holland, he came to me and he brought me a letter sent by the commander of the fascist party in Holland. And he wrote to Eichmann that there are 12 Jews. There were cranks like that. There are 12 Jews who belonged to the fascist party and were loyal members of that party. And they insist that these Jews should not be deported. He said it will be demoralizing. If these people are sent away, it will be demoralizing to all the members of our party because these are loyal members of our party. In order to make it more attractive to Eichmann, he even wrote, these people even might do intelligence work inside the Jewish community, and that might help you. It wasn't very nice to read this, but at least I thought it would be helpful to save some people. The answer of Eichmann, out of the question, and then he added, if you think it will be demoralizing, if these people are sent away today, this week, then let's wait 2 or 3 weeks. By then, people will have got used to the deportation of the Jews from Holland to such an extent that it won't make any special importance anymore. Just one more thing that are difficult to forget. One day, the Italian consul of Lithuania, he wrote to Eichmann that there was a Jewish woman, an Italian woman, but Jewish, named Kotzi, and that her parents lived in Lithuania, and she had visited her parents, and she was caught there, and that there was a deliberation to send her or not to send her to the death camps. So this Italian added, this woman is the widow of a high officer in the Italian army who did courageous work and very, very intelligent and effective work, and he was killed. All Italy speaks about this general, about this high officer, as one of the important officers who had fallen. And therefore we insist, the Italian authorities insist, that this woman should be given the chance to return to Italy. Now again, I must tell you, I mean, after all, Italy is the ally of Germany. And here this consul, in the name of the Italian ally, of the Italian authorities, writes, if we insist that this woman should be returned to Italy, all Italy speaks about this man, how can he refuse? Eichmann, out of question of principle, out of the question, and they saw to it that this woman also was sent to this. I mean, just one. Another thing, which was typical for him, well, in court he was asked, what do you think of the Holocaust? Well, there he said he thinks it was one of the gravest crimes. So I was asked during the trial and also afterwards, and also by journalists and politicians and others, do you think he meant that sincerely? So I said, I'm sure that that was mere lip service towards the outside to save himself, and that it cannot be taken seriously. So people asked me, why do you say that? I said, well, I could imagine, even a man like that, between the end of the war, 1945, and 1961, when the trial took place, 16 years had passed. I can't deny that there is a possibility that his eyes could be opened. Maybe someone could have convinced him that if a man feels some kind of regret, that is possible. Also, he is the accused, and every doubt must go in his favor. So I wouldn't say it's impossible. But here we had proof that in 1956, when he was already in the Argentine, before he was taken by our agents, and he was visited by a Dutch journalist called Wilhelm Sassen, who wrote his story, his life story. The idea that would help his family if something happened to him. And so when after Eichmann was caught, this man gave these documents to Life magazine, and there we got it. And many of these pages with Eichmann's corrections in his own handwriting. So no doubt about the authenticity. So Eichmann, first of all, he tells this Dutchman, you come from Holland. Well, I've seen the trains moving from Holland to Auschwitz. It was wonderful to watch that. And then this Dutchman asked him, yes, but Mr. Eichmann, do you feel sorry sometimes for what you've done? He said, yes, I feel sorry for one thing, that I wasn't hard enough, that I wasn't tough enough, that I didn't fight these damn interventionists enough. And now you see the result, the creation of the State of Israel and the re-emergence of that state there. So I said, if he said that in 1956, 11 years after the war, and now 61, 5 years later, when he's fighting for his life, he suddenly speaks of a grave crime, I think I'm more than justified not to believe in that. There are many things. Just one item that's not always known. You know, we handed in a documentary film. We didn't want it to be too long. There were hundreds of films from many countries, and from Poland and Russia and America and Israel and Germany and so on. But I was asked by my colleagues in the prosecution to prepare a film, not too long, about 45 minutes. So for 3 days and 3 nights, I saw all the films that exist about the gas chambers in Auschwitz and the corpses in Bergen-Belsen and all the other frightening things. And I prepared a film about 45 minutes. And then out of fairness to the accused, we wanted to, before we showed this to the court, we wanted to show it to him and to his wife, and also, I mean, she was here, but also to his lawyers, that they should see the film. Maybe they wanted to attack the authenticity or the relevance and so on. So we took him without the judges. The night before we showed it to the judges, we took him to the courtroom and we showed the film. And he was there to look at it. I mean, I knew the film, so I looked at him. I wanted to see how he would react when he saw that. So he was completely stoical, not reaction, but then suddenly he spoke in a very excited manner to his warden. So after it was over, I called the warden and I said, why was he suddenly so excited? He said, yes, he said that he had been promised that he would never be taken into the courtroom unless he wears his dark blue suit. And here they take him out in his gray pullover and his gray suit, and they shouldn't promise him something like that if they can't keep it. And he has to protest most violently about that they took him out in his gray suit. I mean this is sort of quite typical. But when you're talking about Hannah Arendt, there is, I mean, I've seen, maybe many of you have seen the film. I've seen the film last week, and I've seen the book, of course. Now, I mean, maybe she is an important philosopher in many other fields. I can't judge that. But what she wrote about Eichmann in this connection was absolutely wrong. And I want to tell you, I mean, what is not known generally. It was a few days, about a week before the Eichmann trial started, she arrived in Israel. And someone told me that a philosopher, Hannah Arendt, has arrived in Israel and she wants to write something against the trial. That sounded a bit strange to me to write before the trial started. But anyway, I let her know that I would be prepared to meet her if she wants to discuss and question something. So 2 days later, I got the reply, she's not prepared to speak to anyone of the prosecution. That, I must say, was rather surprising. I mean, she doesn't have to accept everything we say, but that she was not prepared to speak to anyone of the prosecution. But, well, anyway, I had other things to do. So what the instructions I gave was that she should be permitted to come to court every day and also to have access to all the documents by the prosecution and the defense that were handed into court, and that she could create her own opinion according to that. And then what she wrote in this book was, I mean, not only some strange idea, there one can argue a long time, but what most people don't know, and what in the film they don't, of course, realize, that all the important documents, most important documents, she brings in her book in a completely falsified way. I just want to give you one example, which was really very, for me, very, very impressive. We try to show that Eichmann even countermanded Hitler's orders when he thought that it was that it could save a few Jews. So Eichmann usually sat in Berlin, pulled the strings, and his supporters, his assistants, were working in the various countries. But when the German army entered Hungary, you know, Hungary was on the side of the Germans and the Italians, and the leader Horthy, at 1944, he tried to make a separate peace. Hitler tried to prevent that, and Hitler met him at the border, and by threats and promises tried to make him continue on the German side. Also, there were 500,000 Jews still in Hungary who had not yet been deported, and the Germans, of course, wanted to do that. And so Horthy finally agreed, but he made some conditions. One condition was that the Germans should agree that 8,700 Jewish families from Budapest should be permitted to go to neutral countries. Hitler agreed, not out of humanitarian reasons, but he wanted Hungary to be on his side, and he also wanted the 500,000 Jews. How do we know all this? The Germans gave us all the documents of the foreign ministry, and there we found a telegram sent by the German ambassador to Budapest, von Wesenmayer, to Ribbentrop, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and there he described the decision between and the agreement between Hitler and Horthy, including the 8,700 families. But then he added, I have, however, to inform you that the local representative of the SS, Obersturmbannführer Adolf Eichmann, was very upset when he heard about the arrangement between the Führer and Horthy, because he thinks that these 8,700 families, that might be important biological material, and they might from these neutral countries even come to Palestine and help to create the Jewish race again. And therefore Eichmann, when he heard about this, had given instruction that the deportation from Budapest should now be forced and speeded at such an extent that until the visas can be arranged for these Jews, no 8,000 Jews should remain in Budapest. Now, when I handed in the documents and about the when I handled the whole of the Hungarian case in court, so I put in this document with a special stress. I said, here there was a decision of the Führer himself. So he tried even to countermand that and to spoil that decision taken by Hitler himself in order to prevent the saving of a few Jews. If anything showed that this man was not just someone who carried out orders, then it was a document like that. Now, Hannah Arendt, in her book, what does she write about that? She says the prosecutor who handled the Hungarian case, well, that was me, put a great stress on a telegram sent by the German ambassador to Ribbentrop, which is true. And she adds, only because that document shows that Eichmann was not prepared to obey an order of Himmler, but it was contrary to the attitude of the Führer Adolf Hitler. Because the Israeli prosecutor perhaps did not understand that for Eichmann, Hitler was a semi-god who had to be obeyed in every way. It's true that for Eichmann, Hitler was a semi-god, but that makes it worse, because Himmler had nothing to do with it. It was a clear from the not a long document which we put in, that here it was a decision of Hitler himself. He was the one who made that promise to halt him, and he was mentioned in this document. And therefore, the fact that he tried to countermand that, I think that was very, very important. I give you just one example. A book was written by one of the members connected, although he was not an active member in the trial itself, but Jacob Robinson. He wrote a book about the book of Hannah Arendt, about 200 pages, and there he described how all the evidence and the documents that she describes, how they were given in a false and strange way. Why this was done? Many people, some people say that, that she had a Nazi friend. She was a very close friend to a Nazi. Yes, well, I'm not prepared to make any deductions like this from something that I have no proof. So I wouldn't say that. I had a little bit different impression. My impression was that she had that preconceived idea that here the prosecution in Israel had managed to get hold of that man, and that thereby we now try to bolster up his task in order to make the trial of greater importance. And then everything that didn't fit in with this, so she changed the facts somehow and falsified. That's my only explanation. But in any case, she didn't say that the case was not justified. And all in all, she thinks it was just to charge him and also to sentence him. But she mentioned as if we try to exaggerate sometimes his task, which was really only obeying orders, and that was completely untrue.
I've heard you speak perhaps 8 times about the Eichmann trial, and only once did you mention to me the look in Eichmann's eye, and I've never forgotten this. You said that he appeared certainly to the outside world to be this faceless bureaucrat, rather dull, but every once in a while you said from the times you knew him, you would see when he'd get angry there would be a change in his expression that you described as the murderer. You would really see something in his eyes that was very different, and then when he'd realized that he'd changed his expression, he would go back to what he was before. Do you remember that?
Yeah, well, I saw him every day during the trial, And whenever, I mean, he usually kept his sort of ordinary expression. I wouldn't define it very clearly. But then when there was something that he didn't like, he had a very angry look. Sometimes it was a bit frightening. But more than that, actually his lawyers told me that sometimes they also had such an impression that they were frightened by the way in which he sometimes reacted. And I must also, but many people don't know, of course, the first thing I did when he was caught and brought here, I had him examined by psychiatrists. I thought maybe he would plead insanity. And therefore, I wanted to know what his psychological position was. Also, I wanted to, for history's sake, to find out whether he had any special mental conditions. So I had him examined by Israeli psychiatrists, psychologists, but also by a Swiss non-Jewish psychologist. This man didn't know. We didn't give the identity. We gave that in connection with Eichmann's examination and together with some other prisoners as well. I mean, that man had, this Swiss professor had invented a special series, the ordinary examinations of other psychiatrists, and then he added every person examined was shown first of a page of living people, pictures. Some of the murderers, people who had attacked people in a very brutal manner, people who had, well, as I said, sexually assaulted people, and some, on the other hand, people who were Nobel Prize winners and sociologists and others. And he has to decide who are the 5 most important and impressive people. If that's only one page, doesn't show very much. But he's shown 30, 40 pages like that from all countries, different countries in the world. And then apparently a sort of picture arises. Now, we sent that anonymously, with Eichmann and some others, to this Swiss professor. After a few days, I received a notice that this professor wants to talk to me. So I called him, and he said, I would like to have further information about one of the people that you examined. So I said, why? He said, because that examination of that people showed a man of the most incredible murderous instincts that I've ever come across, which was, of course, Eichmann's examination. Now, I can't say that this system of that Swiss was now accepted all over the world, but anyway, it was rather traumatic when I received that opinion, and it was, I think, also a true opinion as far as Eichmann was concerned.
Well, let me just ask you one last question since we're running out of time, but I did want people to understand why you were alive to be able to try the Eichmann case and be with us here today. And I just wanted to ask you about your escape from Europe and your father, who strikes me as really quite an extraordinary man in terms of his timing and his judgment, if nothing else. So could just tell us briefly about
Yes. Well, we're really incredibly lucky. My father was one of the had a most important point in the heavy industry of Germany. He was the general manager of one of the biggest copper factories in Germany. And we wanted to leave actually before 1938. And we had already left our home. We were already in a hotel. And then the Czechoslovak crisis broke in 1938. And SS men came to our hotel and took our passports away. We later heard that apparently the Germans thought war might break out. And they didn't want my father, with all the knowledge of the German heavy industry, to be outside Germany. And that's why they prevented us from leaving. And then Chamberlain came to Munich and there was a famous capitulation to Hitler, and there was a temporary lull in the general situation in Europe, and we received our passports back, and that enabled us to leave Germany for Holland. So nowadays, when Chamberlain is criticized for capitulating, rationally I agree with that, but I keep quiet because it apparently saved our lives. But anyway, we left Germany in 1938, 2 weeks before the Kristallnacht, the Crystal Night, when all Jews were arrested. We went to Holland. And we left Holland in 1940, 1 month before the German invasion of Holland. And we came then to Palestine on the ship, the Patria, which was sunk on the next journey after that. I mean, I was bar mitzvah there on the Patria. The rabbi said I could postpone that, but I asked my father to buy a Torah roll, and we did it there because I thought it was something very special to be bar mitzvah on the way there. But what was even more, as I told you, I mean, my father was one of the leading Zionists of Germany. But ironically, we went to the Theodor Herzl Schule am Adolf Hitler Platz, also one of the ironies of fate. But anyway, in Holland, I went to a mixed school, Jews and non-Jews, but there were hundreds of Jewish pupils all over in all the classes together in that school. And my best friend, who's not Jewish, until very recently was the Dutch deputy and at the United Nations. So he, 20 years after we left, he saw me on the Eichmann trial on television. So he called me, and I invited him to Israel, and he came here, and then he told me that after the war he made some research, and he found out that of all the Jewish pupils in our school, that I think I'm practically the only person who remained alive. That all the Jewish pupils, practically, without a few exceptions, some few exceptions, all the Jews in this school were killed. And then by the Germans when they entered. But then not only that, but later I read in history books that between the outbreak of war in 1939 and March 40, when we left Holland, Hitler had fixed 7 times a date for the invasion of Holland. And every time he postponed it at the last minute. Once the star experts had told him that the star situation wasn't so good. Once they heard something on the BBC and thought the British were suspecting something, and he tried to avoid any kind of interference. A number of times weather conditions were bad. So 7 times when we were still in Holland, there was a date fixed by Hitler and postponed at the last minute. And then the 8th time, when he did move in, we just left Holland. So the idea, what life depends on, gives you sort of room for thought. I only want to tell you that many people thought that my father had a sort of sixth sense as to when to detach himself. So when the German army under General Rommel through Libya and Egypt approached Palestine, everyone came to my father and they said, "Where now? Where do we move to now?" So he said, "Here is the last stop. Here we won't budge." So Rommel had to go back. Now, don't take me seriously so much, but many people said there must be some connection. So therefore Rommel, there was no other choice, but Rommel had to go back. These are moments sometimes when one considers what really life depends on, that gives one room for thought. But I say many things that are connected with the Eichmann trial and with what happened, and also with what is happening now in Germany when I come to contact with them and mainly with the young people there. These things that gives one a lot of thought, and I think a lot of room for cautious optimism. Thank you.
I just want to personally thank. I've interviewed many people in my life. I used to be an anchor on CNBC and the Fox News Channel, and I've interviewed prime ministers. And I must tell you, I mean this sincerely. I feel better about interviewing Gabriel Bach than anyone I've ever interviewed. It just gives me much more of a feeling than Please. Thank you.
anyone wants to see a picture, when I was even younger than now, we meet together with Eichmann.
I should have brought my young pictures also, even my baby pictures. They're...
That also was during the Eichmann trial. Yeah. If you still have 1 minute, I can tell you, this was not just an ordinary picture. That was taken after a particular witness, the only person who was already inside a gas chamber with the doors locked, who could tell the story. How come? He described how he, with 200 other children, were pushed into the gas chamber, and the doors were locked. It was absolutely dark. And he described how the children began to sing to give themselves courage. And when at first nothing happened, after a few minutes, they began to cry and to shout. And then the door opened. We had other evidence why that was done. A train had arrived in Auschwitz with potatoes, and there were not enough SS men to unload the train. And therefore, the officer had given the instructions, why not use some of the children before they were killed to help unload the train. So they opened the door, and they pulled out 20 of the children who were next to the door, nearest the door, and he was one of those. Then they closed the door. The other 180 were killed right away. But these 20 had to help. And when it was over, they were all killed too. But he had committed, the commander had said he had committed some negligence, and that he had done some damage to one of the trucks. And therefore, the commander gave the instruction that before this boy is killed with the next group after that he should be flogged in a camp. And he was sent to the camp, and the SS men who had to carry out the flogging took a liking to him and kept him as his bedman to clean his shoes, etc. This is how he managed to escape. He also described how he came to the gas chamber on that particular day. The children who could still work were used for that. But the ones who were too little or too weak were sent to the gas chamber right away. But the Germans didn't want to examine carefully every child, so they put up a sort of 2 vertical sticks and a horizontal one. And the children had to walk underneath that. And any child that didn't come up to a certain height was sent to the gas chamber right away. Now, he was very little and very weak, but he had an elder brother who was taller and elder than him. But he and his brother realized that he wouldn't make that, he wouldn't succeed in that attempt. So the brother took some stones and put it in the shoes of his little brother, that he should be a bit higher. And he held him up also. But the SS man who was in charge of the operation saw that. And I'm not quite sure whether the brother was killed right away or the brother was sent away, but he was sent to the gas chamber. I mean, this is on the day on which he was sent to the gas chamber. Now, there were many cruel things in this trial, but when that witness finished, the judges were a bit dazed, and they said, well, we have to make a break of 15 minutes. And then the moment that the judges said that, and I sat down, someone from the press gallery took that picture and gave it to me afterwards. I mean, I don't know whether it's a good one, but for me, it has also the impression, and the association is something of a particular nature. If someone wants to see me as a child, when I was at the Theodor Herzl School, I was even younger then, that's another one, but I don't want to keep up too much of your attention. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming. You want...
I just want to thank you, Steve. I think that it takes a mensch to know a mensch.
This is not true, not true. And if I would have known you're bringing all these pictures, I used to be gingy. I would have brought my gingy pictures 20 kilos less. But next time. Thank you. See you outside. Thank you.